So, welcome back. A bit under the weather, but we continue and we move on. We're holding on page Kuflamed Beis, towards the bottom of the page. It's about 7 lines from the bottom. Which is brought in the Sefer HaGilgulim. Sefer speaks about Gilgulim, reincarnation. And in this Sefer, in Perik Chof, Huva, it's brought L'Likutei Amorim. It is brought in L'Likutei Amorim, for that matter, in a number of places. L'Likutei Amorim, which is the first segment of Tanya. And what he's going to go on to explain, based on what we learned in the previous weeks, and this is what the Sefer HaGilgulim contributes to this idea, which we have learned of the koyach, the power of the kav, that comes down all the way to Eilam HaSiyah, all the way to this world. And because towards the very end of the kav, you have that potent energy, as we learned in the previous classes, namely in the previous class, three reasons why its energy just gains momentum as it evolves from the on high to below, which usually one would say this should be just the opposite. Usually there's a diminution, meaning there's a minimization, there's a lack, a deficiency as something comes from above to below. If it's a light, let's say, so on high, it shines higher. Vertical or horizontal doesn't make a difference. You have a light, the further you go away from the light, the more the lack of that very light coming to the farthest point, closer to the candle as an example, or to the bulb, it's much lighter, much brighter. Around the sun, of course, it's the heat or the light, the brightness is incomparable to the way the sun, eventually the light of the sun goes further away from the illuminator, which is the ball of the sun itself, naturally so. So when you talk about the kav, which is light which comes into the chalol, it should be minimized from one level to the other, which it does. Of course, it's minimized, and eventually through the Eilam Bri, Yitzir Asiyah, but yet, and in Eilam Asiyah, it is, as we can see evidently, there's the minimization of this air, of this light, and that's why we have a world of Eilam Asiyah, which, despite everything, receives its koyach, its koyach of ishavus, meaning to say, it's mishave u'mischaya, it's receiving its vitality, its life from the Ein Sof, and apparently, as such, everything should have, by default, demonstrated the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we look at Eilam Hazeh, it's quite to the contrary. The message is not only right in the middle, but just the opposite. Ani v'afsi eid. Here I am, and Elokus really is not something that I appreciate on my own, says Eilam Hazeh. And you need the Yid to come in and toil with his Torah, with his mitzvahs, to be megala, to reveal the emes Hashem la'olam, the truth of Hashem la'olam. We do it slowly but surely, like the Rebbe says. This is the ma'aseinu v'avodaseinu, our actions, our service. It goes to reveal this emes Hashem la'olam, to draw, to discover the emes, which is the inherent emes of Eilam Hazeh, and then consequently you have the yira kol basar yachtov kipi Hashem diber. You see every particle of Eilam Hazeh, every particle of Eilam Hazeh. If it's the more sensitive parts of Eilam, but more so the pasuk is even basar yachtov. Ayin b'ayin, the physical eye, will be able to see Elokus. Ayin b'ayin yiru, and then v'yiro kol basar again, which says even the very flesh, the mundane flesh, will be able to see Elokus. Malchus, the grander scale, the Molikvedi is Kol Haaretz, the entire Oretz. You're not talking about the Shul or the Beis HaMedrash, the Kol. The Oretz will see the Gilui Kved Malchus, say the revelation of the Malchus of Kodesh Baruch Hu. But this is not default, because there is a minimization of that area of the Kav, level after level, till it comes to Elam Asiyah. The light is minimized. There's many more levushim, many more garments, if you will, the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe earlier, which cover up the brightness of that Eir Liki. Therefore, we have Elam Asiyah. Yet together with that, Alter Rebbe is saying that when the Kav comes down and it reaches the rock bottom, which is the Daimim of Elam Hazeh, you see something fascinating, that it just gains momentum. So Alter Rebbe introduces the rebound idea. Alter Rebbe introduces what is we learned in the previous classes about right mitachas, right the bottom of Elam Hazeh. This is connected to the Ein Sof, to the Igul Hagodel, the Eir Shalifnei Hatzimtzum, true infinite power of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is right there. Mitachas, if we think about it in the way that Alter Rebbe explained, based on the study of the Arizal, it's that eagle which the Kav comes in, and then also you have the Makif of Ak Odom Kadmen, and for these three reasons, you have there's a regain of a new potent energy precisely when it hits rock bottom. As Dr. Rebbe is going to point out to explain, that's why Dafka, the offer is, which is the lowest within Elam Hazeh, you have a Kayach, which is constantly producing kind of Yeshmi Ayin. We find this ex nihilo phenomenon, which is usually B'chek HaBoirei, in the bosom of the Creator only, can create something from nothing. And we have this constantly. We see it evidently in front of our eyes, this idea that you look at the earth and how much it constantly produces different types of growths and trees, especially when you plant something which is, even though it's not ayin mamosh, there's a kernel or there's a seed, but yeah, there is kind of the eshmi ayin, a little tiny seed, and then a beautiful apple tree, huge tree with fruits, tameim, omineim, different types of fruits based on this which you planted. It's kind of idea of ex nihilo, not exactly the way the Eibishter creates Yeshmi Ayin from totally nothing, is nothing at all. You planted the seed, but there is the phenomenon of Yeshmi Ayin in front of one's face, or one kernel, which is less a chidush, because this which is produced is similar to this which you planted, as opposed to when it comes to the apple tree, as an example, the plant, the seed that is, it's not an apple, a beautiful apple, but a kernel. It is that very kernel that you plant. This which grows, but nonetheless the quantity of this which grows is also kind of a yeshmi ayin from that one kernel. That is embedded in the Adoma constantly, which is evident to the enormity of the Koyach Aliki, the godly force which exists precisely in the lowest of Elam Hazeh, which is the offer, which is the earth, the ground. So, encapsulating, and with this additional idea which Alter Rebbe shows you evidently, Dafka, which is found in Koyach of the Adama, the lowest within Elam Hazeh. This is all explained in the previous weeks. And we speak about the Kav, probably the 7th or 8th class of this very chapter. We speak about this idea, how it gains momentum towards the very end. We spoke about it in the last class. Now, wherever you're watching, these classes that we mentioned, usually towards the beginning, this probably helps a bit. So, we did in the last few weeks give this introduction regarding this Gyanis HaKodesh Chof, which we did pledge again that we're going to, things in perspective over here, what we think about Tanya, of course, it includes the Igeres HaKodesh Chafet, but nonetheless, this particular epistle, which is part of the segment of Igeres HaKodesh, which is the fourth segment, Tanya having 5 segments. This is the Teresh Biksav, Teresh Chassidus, Uti Amorim, Shaykh Lamuna, Igeres HaTshuva, Igeres HaKodesh. We did have a whole presentation on this particular segment in the beginning of 10, which is 10 over, back, that is. Wherever you're watching it, as we just mentioned, but the easiest access to all the previous classes, including this presentation, the beginning of 10. But namely, presently, when we're talking about this Igeres HaKodesh, you can see it on all these previous classes on this very Igeres, on the original website, like we said, TanyaOnline, oneword.com, TanyaOnline.com. And the advantage also, the way it's set up, all the previous classes, the latter classes, these classes on top of the site, and it moves its way back, but it goes all the way to the very beginning, not only of Igeres HaKodesh, but L'Kutei Amorim. So we merited to conclude L'Kutei Amorim, Shaykh B'Emuna, Igeres HaTshuva, and Igeres HaKodesh, presently middle of Chav. And we, as we were saying, Chav is distinct. Chav is not in that, again, namely for the newcomers, because those who continue with us over here know very well by now, particularly, this is a lengthier Igeres in its size, but namely in its depth. It is very distinct, and again, this is the message which we pledge to mention every time of this Igeres, learning the Igeres HaKodesh. It's very distinct, and when one starts learning Tanya, no, we don't start with Igeres HaKodesh because of its distinct presentation, because of its how different it is one way or another from the regular Tanya, in the way that there's a lot of Kabbalistic ideas which need to be dissected and need to be explained. Even though every part of Tanya one has to toil to understand, but nonetheless, there's much of an easier flow, easier perception, easier ability, easier to have hands-on on the understanding and the perception of the message. Very distinct, yes, Tanya, the toil, again, a matter of Torah, but nonetheless, this Chabad, established that the human intellect could appreciate this, like we appreciate, like the human intellect appreciates everything which it studies, whatever it has its hands on, something intellectual, human capacity, has the ability to connect with any intellectual concept. And the Alter Rebbe precisely establishes Chassidus as Chassidus Chabad, that the human intellect could understand it and appreciate it profoundly and live with it and identify with it. So the whole Tanya, to the exclusion of this Igeres HaKodesh, and for that matter we mentioned later, Kutres Achrid, which is the 5th segment, also has a similar presentation, a similar chapter, but it's within Tanya itself, which is usually so explainable and so easy, meaning to say, when you learn and you toil, like every part of Torah, one has to toil, you move on and you chap, and it goes even quicker in time as well. I believe this is the 14th or 13th class on this very Igeres HaKodesh. So in size it's longer as well, but nonetheless, we didn't cover so much every day, every time we learn, because this is much deeper and much more complex than any other chapter in the entire Sefer Tanya. So we gave an introduction because someone, again, knows how vital Tanya is to one's Avodas Hashem, beyond vital. It's crucial that every Yid learns Tanya. It's the perfect manual to Avodas Hashem. We're not going to go into it now. We explain why we use that term. When you start learning Tanya, and you open up any class, and the class is right now middle of Igeres HaKodesh, you could say, whoa, this is deep, let me go on to the next Sefer as an example. No, learn Tanya, and know that within Tanya there are 2 chapters within the entire Sefer Tanya Kadisha, Igeres Teres HaKadosh Chof, and Kuntres Acher, one of the chapters of Kuntres Acher, which are not numbered there, is distinct. And yet, of course, we learn it because it's all based on the information and depth of the Alter Rebbe's approach on Torah. Alter Rebbe's Gili of Teres Achsidus, Teres Chilus Chabad. It's all based on Alter Rebbe's Torah, so we can understand it. We do try. We navigated it through the weeks, probably been months since we started, and with the grace of Hashem, to be able to explain it at least to the maximum of our ability, at the time at least. So it's important to know it, and we said we're going to take note of this prior to every of these classes. And I must say, interestingly enough, we are getting towards the end of this. So TanyaOnline.com, you have all the previous classes on this very Geras HaKodesh. And we explained different ideas, which I think it was, for example, this idea of the Eagle HaGadol, that everything was Molei Vein Sof, and very, very quickly, nothing finite, even the most sublime Olam or sublime revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because someone that has a bit of the spirit of finitude cannot stand in the face of the infinite. Nothing finite could stand in the face of the infinite. That's very simple. So everything is Ein Sof. So how do you have an Olam, even an Olam Bria, where you have Gan Eden Elyon, Olam Atzilus, a world which houses the Ein Sof? It's just impossible to withstand or to exist in the face of the infinite. It can't be, because Olam is Melashna Helam Behester, like the Gemara says. It's an Olam, it's a world. Hashem is Ein Sof, nothing finite. In this case, Olam is not finite. No, Olam is not finite, but nonetheless, in comparison to the Ein Sof, of course, it's an Olam, which by definition is Melashna Helam Behester. So it's finite in comparison. So nothing could stand in the face of the infinite. So the Eibishter, so like it says in the Arizal points out that the Eibishter established this Eagle HaGadol, and in there, of course, not a physical circle, but there was a space of the void, not of Hashem Himself, of the Oir of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the light. It's like we mentioned, you have a beautiful furnished home worth millions of dollars, but lights closed, so you can't appreciate what's really there. Of course, the Eibishter is everywhere. Where did Hashem go? Hashem cannot be can't be a dismissal of the etzem of Hashem, but the light of Hashem. Maybe to kind of turn off the light over here, so there could be a room for Amidas Ha'olamus, and in this eagle, the trickle of light, the kav, which comes in, and it's a trickle of light. Because at the end of the day, it has to be very small in order to create something in the face of, to be able to counter the Ein Sof, meaning to say that the Ein Sof, there's a complete void of the Ein Sof, but too much of the Ein Sof from the Ein Sof Shalifni Hatzimtzum, where there is no total manifestation of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that comes in again. A fraction of Ein Sof is also Ein Sof, so it also could not really be a place, a domain for the Amidas Ha'olamis. So that's why it's a small trickle of light comes in, and of course, Amidas Ha'olamis also needs light and energy to create. Elam Atzilus, there's a lot of energy which creates Elam Atzilus, but that's where the kav, that little trickle of light from the Ein Sof, comes in. And then there's the different giluim, different levels of these, different levels of the higher, and this which is closer to the kav, and this which is farther from the kav, and eventually the beginning of the creation, or starting from the emanation of Elam Atzilus, the creation of Elam Bria, the formation of Elam HaYitzira, and then the action, the doing of Elam HaAsiyah, which this is where we are, Elam HaAsiyah Ruchni, and then there's the physical Elam HaAsiyah, which we are here, rock bottom, right? Rock bottom. Elam HaZah Tachten She'ein Tachten Lamata Imenu, which needs not to be explained, nothing lower, nothing more nadir, away from the kav, away from the light. And that's why Elam HaZah looks the way it is. It presents itself the way it is. on its own by default not demonstrate the emes Hashem la'elam. A yid has to come in megala and to reveal the emes Hashem la'elam, starting from his toiling in Torah and in mitzvahs. That's where the energy is, and that's explained the other day. Of course, there's the kol masechel l'shem shamayim, all you're doing for the sake of heaven, chol drachecha da'ehu, that the person's entire 24 hours is encompassed with a godly message. But the dynamite, explained the other day, the subways, there's the dynamite that breaks through everything, the dynamite energy. And then eventually they come in and they, patch things up. It should look like a place where a presentable place, a train easily goes through and people could come, and stairs and windows or whatever it's made up. But what breaks through is, of course, the dynamic energy which exists, which comes through, which blows through, and it allows things to be established as a place in the usage of in the case of subway, we used that the other day. It's not the touch-ups which makes it, it's the dynamite energy which is able to pierce through, and mile after mile after mile. And then eventually, once the dynamite energy comes through, then you could patch it up in the tracks and whatever it consists of. Again, we just use that as a simple example. The dynamite energy is in the Torah, which breaks through the hell and the hester, the concealment over the godly realities. The Torah the person learns, because that's where the potent and godly and untainted or not untainted, unadulterated, that is. Of course it's untainted. No, it's unadulterated purity, because Baruch is inherent in Torah, or in the mitzvah the person does, like Dr. Rebbe himself explains famously, Perek Lamed Hey in Tanya, and earlier speaks about Torah in Hey, in earlier chapters, Gimel, and so on. This is the Koyach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. But then eventually the person comes into Elam Hazeh, L'chol Basechel Shem Shamayim, L'chol Rechecha Da'eyu, and all he touches it up. Eventually, 24-hour, 24/7, a person lives a life in alignment with his Creator. He brings it, he's Megala, he reveals more and more the Emes Hashem La'elam, and eventually this world becomes an abode for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the ultimate purpose of creation. Sahaba HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem wanted a dwelling place, a domicile down here in this very physical world. That is the koyach the Yid has to be megala, to reveal, to open the lights, if you will. So we learned this in I believe it was the 7th or 8th class in this, where we explained that equal. So then the kav, and when the kav comes down, of course it's minimized, because it starts from on top, and as it comes down, there's a minimization of the error, which again, that's the reason why Bria doesn't look like Matzah. By the way, there's so many worlds. Al Rebbe writes this Ein Sof Eilamis. Within it, says Al Rebbe writes these 4 Eilamis: Noah, Atzilus, Bria, Tzira, Asiya, Abechlolos. There's so much. There's infinitely more, but generally there's that divide, a compartmentalization of Atzilus, Bria, Tzira, Asiya. And Asiya is the rock bottom, because there's the minimization of the Eid of the Kav. And then within Elam Asiya itself, there's Daimim, Tzameh, Chai, Medaber. There's different levels. There's the Yid, then there's the talking, the human being. Say Medaber, which is generically, and you say Medaber is the talking human being, which is the human being. And then there's the animal life. And then there's the botanical. And then there's the inanimate. It's the rock bottom. And you see, and that's why you don't see any chayas on the surface, because the kav is finally minimalized to the very end and to the very bottom of its energy, which is again down here in daimim. But ironically, the daimim carries that kayach overtly, that is, and demonstrably, the kayach of the core of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which can create yesh mi'ayin, something from nothing, the ex nihilo idea, which is in the bosom of the Creator. And Al Rebbe writes, this is connected to the etzem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the core of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is so manifest in the very rock bottom of Elam Hazeh itself. which we don't see anywhere else in the entire order of evolution. Seder Ishtalshalos. The ground is constantly producing. So you're going to say it's not mamish ayin, there's a seed. So first of all, you take note that you go to the forest. So there wasn't the formal planting, as an example. But all this is of course based on there's this seed, or that energy of the seed, which eventually lands on these. When you look at, for example, a forest of trees, or wherever you look around in Ilm Haz, there's always trees that grows. So there you don't even see the formal planting of a human being taking. It's not a matter of the human being, or the formal planting of the seed into the ground. It just grows. The ground is always producing. Who was here and planted that tree and that tree and that tree, and the thousands and the millions of trees? There wasn't a human being which was around and planted. Because it picks up. It's constantly, there's like the motor of wanting to produce kind of ex nihilo, a beautiful tree from where? From what? And then when you have even the human being planting that little seed, a beautiful tree of pomegranates or apples, even oranges, this is kind of an ex nihilo idea. And where is it found? Overtly, demonstrably. You don't have to look in some science book and says, there's a certain kayach, there's a certain energy in this. Take a plant. Every 5-year-old could take a seed and plant, cover it up, come back many years later, and snip the apple off that very tree. And it's constant throughout all of time. How could that be? And the answer, towards the very end, no seifon b'tchilos, on the end, it's actually the beginning, or namely, as he explains over here, what's the reason behind this? For the 3 reasons. One, because right under, there's the Igel HaGadol, and we're rock bottom. So what's right under Olam Haza? You have the Mekayach HaMakif within the establishment of Seder Ishtalshalos, which we're not going to go into it now. We explained there, Ak, but namely the Kayach HaMakif of the Ein Sof, which is of course even more, is much more Ein Sof in the Ein Sof Shlifnei Tzimtzum, which borders the bottom of Olam Haza, and that gives the Kayach Dafka in the lowest of Olam Haza. This is what we learned again in encapsulation. This is what we learned, to be able to constantly produce Yesh Mi'ayin. That Kayach of Yesh Mi'ayin becomes more evident, more than the entire Seder Ishtalshalos, the order of evolution, on these high, lofty levels over Olam Haza and the rock bottom of Olam, of course, the rock bottom of Olam Haza. And the third idea again was the kav, the phenomenon of rebound. When you throw a ball, it slows down when it gets to the wall. You throw it from a distance, so it's minimized as it moves along. Where do you see it? Where do you know it? Continue to throw it, and wait a bit, you'll see it'll slow down and it'll fall, because the kayach that you imbued in that, infused into that ball, will be minimized, and it is minimized. It doesn't fly forever. So when you throw it and it starts slowing down, but it reaches the wall, and the moment it reaches the wall, that rebound is very quicker than its way towards the wall. The rebound, the phenomenon of rebound. That's what happens when the kav reaches rock bottom. The kayach of rebound also gives an enormous kayach on the lowest level within Olam Haza to have that kayach, that evidential kayach, to constantly produce kind of yesh mi'ayin, similar to the ex nihilo kayach, which is the kayach in the bosom. The expression is b'chei kaber, in the bosom of the Creator. Only Hashem has that kayach. And again, as Dr. explains in one of these classes, which we learned over here, that it's the deepest kayach within Hashem. The Etzem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu has that kayach to mahaba, yesh mi'ayin, something from nothing. Again, the phenomenon ex nihilo, and that is embedded is evident in the lowest levels of Elam Hazah for these three reasons, which is again the encapsulation of what we learned recent and tapping into different ideas which we learned in the previous classes. So the Rebbe goes on and explains Sefer HaGilgulim, Hova B'Lekut which is brought Lekut Yamorim, Mislabeshes Tchila Ha'ara, this Ha'ara of the Kav, the Ein Sof, which is coming from the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Eir HaAtzilus Sheba'asiyah, and the light of Atzilus within Asiyah. Asiyah or Atzilus? Not to go into it in length, but it's we just try to just capture this idea. Atzilus Sheba'asiyah. You have the Atzilus, which we know Atzilus, it's a world which is the loftiest world, the highest. And again, it's not only the highest in level, in other words, the higher of all the other three elements, but it's a total different idea, as we explained many times. A world that houses the Ein Sof. But within every single Elam, there's the loftier part of that Elam. Take, for example, a human being. The deepest part of the human being, of course, is the ability to intellectualize, as an example. So, we say intellectualize generically is when a person is learning something deep, is the kayach to capture this which is written, for example, and it doesn't exist within all creation. The animal cannot understand. It doesn't have the ability to doesn't have the kayach of scholarship, doesn't have the ability to perceive and understand. Yes, it knows where the barn is and it recognizes its owner. This is just certain awareness, has just an awareness of different its surrounding and this which it needs to be used to in order to live as an animal. Those are the mountains, and knows where where to graze and where the grass is, and simply has that overall awareness, but there's no depth, there's no intellect there in the life and the world of the animal. The human being are given gift of intellect, so this becomes the deepest and the highest level within the human expression, the ability to intellectualize. So, yeah, got it. And you say the person stands really aloof, separated. Sometimes we physically remove ourselves when you want to understand something, especially deep. You take the safer, you go into a room because you have to understand. You remove yourself from the norm in order to express and execute the kayach of seichel. So you're removed, you're aloof. And then there's the expression of midas and other areas where the person, which is again, midas is more when you interact with another party. And then there's the entire kind of person's eating, drinking, and so on, the life that he lives as a human being, which is again, like the Gemara says, similar to the animal, not in a negative way. So there's so many different components within the human being himself. There's the transcendent, this which is in the middle, this which is inferior in comparison. For example, comes that Amam, and says the person, the wise is recognized with his wisdom, but also in his actions, eating and drinking. And Alter enumerates the 10 ideas, which is part of the human nature. He says that the wisdom of the person has to be reflected in these inferior acts as well. A chacham walks differently, he talks differently, he eats differently, he drinks differently. Everything about the chacham is distinct. So this is just an example. You see, there's the chachma itself, but then there's the chachma within the lower expressions. Again, we're giving this example. It's a classic example, which we learn from the Rambam and the Mishnah Torah, explained famously in Tur Reish Lamed Aleph, that this is where the chachma of the human being, the loftiest part of the human being, which one would say there's a disconnect. There's the chachma, and then when I do things as a human being, I'm removing myself from this experience and this exercising my chachma, my intellect. Comes the Rambam says no. Comes Torah and says no. Every part of your conduct has to be demonstrable that you're the Chacham as well. That your Koach Chachma governs every part of you. Your eating, your drinking, it has to be recognized. Nikr, b'maisa, machali, mashkei. This Chachma has to be recognized in every part of your life, which is important, right? Very important. It's not the person's a great person because he knows how to intellectualize and he's a scholarly person, as an example. No, it has to be recognized in everything. The way the person talks and acts and eating, drinking, and again, this is the most inferior expressions of the human being as a human being, which is such an important message on its own. But we're just using this, again, context, we're just using this as an example that you see the Chokhmah in a lower level. So when we're talking about the Eir coming down into the lowest and creating Elam Haza, so this is all in the world of Asiya, not even Yitzira, not even Bria, much more so not even in the Elam Hatzilus on its own. We're talking about Elam Asiya. But the Alter Rebbe speaks, there's the Atzilus within Asiya. Because as it evolves, so there's the higher dimensions within Asiya itself, higher revelation, a deeper revelation within Atzilus, within Asiya itself, which is the Eira Atzilus Shaba Asiya. So again, it took maybe a little time to elaborate on that, which was always a beautiful message. That's the reason why I naturally elaborate on it, because it's such a profound message of Teda coming across by the codifier of Teda, the Rambam, this Mishnah Teda, later explained by Achreinim, which is very telling on its own. But this is just an example. You have the Eira Atzilus Shabasiya. So this Kab, the Hamshach of the Kab, which coming from the Ein-Sof, it invested the Atzilus within Asiya, and from there to Bria v'Yitzira Shebasiya, a lower, right, Bria Yitzira within Asiya. And again, the Asiya is because we're talking about the way it creates, the way it connects to this very physical Elam Asiya. Umihen the Princeira Neshama, the Malchus Asiya. We could take a lot of time to explain this, but we're going to try to really do this briefly, because Malchus is the lowest within Atzilus, the classic Elam Atzilus, which is the Malchus, which is the lower level, which we explained this numerous times. Malchuscha Malchus Kolilamim. We mentioned many times, Al Rebbe cross-references a lot, like he does over here, L'Kotei Amorim points out this, which he brought in L'Kotei Amorim, or many times Al Rebbe himself cross-references, he says, look there, and then this is again the advantage. He mentioned also the website. Easy click to find any class in the way the class is set up, easy to follow, separate scroll bar on the text, which we as well mentioned. So Shaykh B'Emunah is an example. We have this on this website. I've explained the Malchus, the Olam is begin from Malchus, higher than Malchus. There are no Olamais. There's no time, there's no place, which is the makeup of Elam Haza, the core makeup of Elam Haza. Where does it begin? Malchuscha, Malchus Kolilami. Even time, Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimlech. Higher than that, the Shem Havaya. Hoya Heva B'Yekecha, that's the Shem Havaya. Higher than Malchus. Malchus is where Malchuscha, Malchus Kolilami. Malchus is where the Elam is begin, not prior. So Malchus has the Koach of Livrei. And here you're talking about the Elam Asiya. So there's a neshama, which is the energy of Malchus, but here it's Malchus dim Malchus, because this is a koach which has to create the very physical. So it's not just like an energy from Atzilus to Bria, which is also, that's where the real Malchus begins, because the Elam Atzilus, higher than that, there is no phenomenon of Elam, no Mokim, no Zman at all. By comparison, for sure, but B'chlolus, as the Alter Rebbe says, Mokim Zman doesn't exist, time and place doesn't exist higher than Malchus. So Malchus becomes Malchus Kolilame, but here the Alter Rebbe says Malchus dim Malchus Nasiya, because this is where you have to create the actual, this is the koach which creates the physical Elam, which is so distinct. Then even Elam HaYetzira, which is a spiritual Elam. For that matter, it says Gan Eden HaTachtin is an Elam HaYetzira. Here there is the malchus dim malchus of Asiya, and then there is the koach neshama, which is the light which ultimately manifests, which gives the koach to the malchus Asiya to actually produce. So he says this comes from Atzilus Shabasiya, Mimenu lebriya v'yitzira Shabasiya, and mehen lebchinas ein neshama malchus Asiya, which is the rock bottom, which is the reason why he says Eir Neshama also, because here he's alluding to this energy, the way it rebounds within Elam Hazeh itself. And it identifies as well that Koach Makif, which is the Koach Ak, which is the Makif within, I say the Shtalshus, which we spoke about 2 classes ago. And then there is the Ein Sof, which is the Ein Sof Shlifnei Atzilus, which also borders Elam Asiya. And that's where you have the Eir Neshama, that there's still something which is very Neshamatic. Again, Neshama is the deepest levels from the 3 Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama. Because as he says over here, through this, you have Yesh Kech V'Oiz, there's enormous energy and strength. Sirum hakli, the malchus asnasi, the end of the keli container, which we also explained in probably 3-4 classes ago. There's the oir of the elemis and the kelim of the elemis, the kelim of the container, with this which is limits the air, contains the air, and because it contains the air, it's less powerful than the air itself. Because the air, when it's not contained, it's not a matter of there's no structure. You want to drink something, you don't just let the bottle pour and try to drink. No, you contain it with a cup. That makes it attainable for you to drink, like a mensch, as an example. But the reason is not because there's more, rather because there's less. And you're not all over the place, and it goes through your mouth, so you make it less in order to be a functioning type of drinking and satisfaction. It's not because there's more, there's less. The keli, the container, minimizes the air. And in this case, you need less because it's a creator of Olam Hazeh. And the Chol HaShabahem, like he says, the Olam Hazeh, the phenomenon of keli, container, is very center in the whole establishment of Olam Hazeh. Because this is what the keli does. It contains the ayr. In this case, you need the container idea in order that the physicality of Elam Hazeh should come into being. So this is the koach v'sim hakeli of Malchus, the Malchus of Asiya, which is Yesod Ofar, which is the foundation of Ofar from the 4 elements of Daimim Tzemech Chaim Medaber, or as the Rambam writes it, he divides it differently. Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Ofor, 4 components of Elam Hazeh. There's nothing else, as the Rambam writes in the very beginning of his Mishnah Torah, that everything is a combination, or it has starkly the Eish, the Ruach, the Mayim, Ofor, or the combination of different elements, which is the only establishment. This is the makeup, and there's nothing in between. There's nothing else other than the Eish Ruach Mayim Ofar in the domain of Elam Hazeh. The lowest is the Ofar, which is known as the Seidah Ofar, and then the Keli Malchus, the Malchus Asiya should be Seidah Ofar, which is the Maimer Tachi Haaretz, which is the saying of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ba'asor Ma'amoris Nivra Ha'olam. As again, go back to Shaykh B'Muna, the first paydik given Shaykh B'Muna is a click away. That the Yehirakia B'Seicha, Yehirakia, as the Baal Shem Tov writes, La'elam Hashem Dvarcha Nitzah B'Shamayim, the saying of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which Hashem spoke in the very beginning of creation. Ba'asor Ma'amoris Nivra Ha'olam, the world was created with the 10 sayings of Hashem, which is presented in the very beginning of Bereshis. It says 9 times Vayemer. The Gemara says Bereshis Nami Maimeru. It's Basar Mamoris Nivra Ha'olam, and that saying is Dvar of Choy Mekayomim Lo'ad. That it's not the Eibush to just spoke, which means Hashem spoke creation into being, But that didn't only happen in the very beginning of creation. Hashem is constantly Mechadish B'du B'cholim Tovim Ma'aseh Bereishis. Al Rebbe explains there in Shaycha B'Emunah, which is the second segment, which we again merited to conclude, lined up over here on this site, original site, tanyaline.com. It's worth to again even to tap into the very first chapter. That Lo'elam Hashem Dvarcha Nitza B'Shamoyim. Not only Hashem spoke then, but constantly speaking creation into being, which is the Maimer, in this case, the Maimer Tachi Oretz Desha, which Hashem spoke then, and it gave the ability for the Oretz to be a producer, constant producer, whenever you plant. And again, Dafka, the offer, demonstrably produces, and similar to that Yesh Mi Ayin Koyach, or it has that Yesh Mi Ayin Koyach more obvious than any other part of creation. That Maimer, not only Hashem said it then, but constantly talking creation into being, again, as explained there, which he doesn't elaborate on this idea, but it's the constant mind, that Maimer of Tachi Oretz Desha, that the earth should produce. Hashem spoke and that earth should produce, and so it did. But not only then, the Yispail, B'kerev Ha'oretz, Tov Mid Leilam V'od, that energy, which is embedded in the offer, is constantly producing, constantly has the ability to produce, and he says, Leilam V'od, forever. As long as the world stands, the offer has the ability to produce. And not coming on a spiritual plane, there's enormous energy. Think a 5-year-old puts in the seed, does it right, maybe with some help, comes back a few years later, beautiful apple tree, and similar. Which is Ein Sof, constantly there. B'lei bilvad b'sheish mei bereish is not solely in the time when Hashem created the world. K'maimer yishutz ha'mayim, or maimer teitz ha'oretz nefesh chaya, michochma the malchus da'asiyah. Now, there says something interesting. We find something very distinct in the 6 days of creation to the present time. In the 6 days of creation, the earth produced not only apples, oranges, anything associated with the botanical world, but it also produced the animal, as an example. Or all the mammals, whatever the pasuk speaks about. Teitze ha'oretz nefesh chaya. Does that happen today? No, it doesn't. That's only at the time of Sheshes Me'beresh, 6 days of creation. And so to the water producing this which was associated with the world of water, fish and everything else. The water produced. Does the water produce that today? No, it does not. So there was a certain kayach which was embedded in the offer then, but the idea, the planting and the growing, which is associated with the botanical world, if it's the trees or the bushels of the kernels in any, or grain or whatever it is, that remains throughout, and that never came to a stop. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe here says, "Michochma the malchus atzilus." The asiyah, that is, again, because it's more of a higher level production. That's a simple reason. It's associated with a chaya. And then there is, so then it was, hey, Shebizaymi Bereshis, Ha'er Be'elam has ha'or me'erin tzal baruch b'chesed chinam b'yalas ma'in nukvin klal. So the Alter Rebbe, it's interesting, it seems like hey here. Okay, it says ha'or Be'elam hazeh, but there's ha'or me'erin tzal b'chesed chinam b'yalas ma'in nukvin klal. So Alter Rebbe in this very end of his brackets speaks about another phenomenon, but right away, just to understand that there was an interesting kach, but came to a stop by the 6 days of creation. Then water produced the fish, and all the mammals coming out from the ground, as an example. But that came to a stop. because today it's a different, right after the 6 days of creation, that's not where they have the mammals coming from. There's the natural productivity of these mammals are similar to the fish in a total different way. But that was the koyach which was embedded in the offer, which again you see the enormity. Why would the offer produce animals and the water, the fish? What is it? Why was it done in this way? Why did it come from the clouds or from the ruach, the higher level of within creation, the eish, ruach, mayim, offer? Why from the offer? Why not from the wind? Or the water? The water produced fish, but all the mammals didn't come from the water. Or from the eish, the fire brought about the creation of animal, as an example. Why from the offer? Which again tells you the enormous koyach of the offer for the 3 reasons we mentioned earlier. But that type of expression of the offer came to a stop at the 6 days of creation. But the planting and growing continues, as he says, Tommy Leilam Vod forever, as we see this evidently, again in the koyach of the offer. So he says, then in the beginning of creation, which is the last part of the brackets, was B'li Halas Mayim Nofim Klal, without the arousal, literally of the feminine waters, which is the simple idea of mashpia, mikabel, giver and taker. Usually the taker arouses the mashpia in order to be mashpia. Classically, masculine, feminine union phenomena. The arousal of the mikabel of the recipient. And in this case, it would be, on the literal sense, man planting in order to there should be the growth. Which in this case there wasn't. Adam ayin lavidus Adam, the pasuk says, till Adam Hashem came about. So who planted? Who was there to cultivate the earth? No, it came directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It was chesed chinam, was a clear kindness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to allow things to happen without the investment of the mekabel, in this case, classically man planting, cultivating the earth, which is also a reflection again on a spiritual plane. Hashem is mashpia when man submits himself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and arouses HaKadosh Baruch Hu interest in to be mashpia. Hashem, Adam was created, he put him in Gan Eden, la'ovdo l'shamra, to serve and to guard, which is generally, eventually, the evolution of this, which would be Torah mitzvahs, mitzvahs hasei, mitzvahs leisas. A person toils in Torah, toils in doing a mitzvah, and a hidur mitzvah, stays away from this what Hashem says not to do, l'shamra, and that is an arousal from the below in order that Hashem should mashpia from on high. You'll toil and I will give you rain. Also, gishmechem has the connotation of gashmias, which as a human being the person appreciates. And he needs it, as the Rambam says, in order to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So there's constant giver and taker. The masculine and the feminine. The on high and the below. Hashem and the world, namely his people. People in general. Am Yisrael in particular. Doing the right thing. It arouses HaKadosh Baruch Hu to want to be mashpia. What about the first days of creation? It was no one around. The pasuk says there was no one around. That's what the idea is. There was everything with chesed chinam. I'm going to start, I'm going to give, and eventually when Adam is created, that's when the harmonious relationship begins with man and creator. So this kayach, which was embedded in the Aretz, was only coming from Hashem. But you saw the enormity of the kayach dafka offer. The offer is producing. The nefesh chaya came from the offer. Man was different. Man, it wasn't just produced soul and body. Also came from the offer, but there was Hashem from the clay, but man is a sublime creation of Kodesh Baruch Hu. Hashem put it from his core. Man, the nofach mitoich yusig b'pimiyusig nofach that it remains beirig beis idlukuti amorim a click away. The chilik elakami eventually becomes the chilik elakami mal mamosh, which is a different type of creation. But here the offer producing nefesh chaya animals coming. If you were there, you'd see the offer producing the Nefesh Chai. The animals come, all animals, Chai, everything's coming from the offer. So it was evident that this Koich of the offer in the very beginning of creation. So that dimension of the offer, again, also B'li Allah's mind, because it's a Kodesh Baruch Hu himself. Kodesh Baruch Hu himself. And then but that particular production came to a stop in the 6 days of creation. Towards the end, when this all happened. But the koyach, which has the ability to produce constantly, continues. The planting, the growing, if it's the tree, the grain, and so on, continues throughout all time. And again, evident precisely in the lowest, within the lowest, which is Neil Masiyah, and within Neil Masiyah, in the Yeseda offer, for the 3 reasons we explained. The Alter Rebbe explains. Alter Rebbe presents here. That's Miach Hasam Bilonis. The idea this continued after the 6 days of creation. That's just the words before the brackets. Tamid La'elam Vod. Forever. To produce grass, trees, paytas, fruits, mi'ayin liyesh tamid, from nothing to something constantly. And again, it's not totally nothing, because there is the seed, but there is, again, the idea, even the vast growth within the Elam Hazah, which no one physically even planted. So you see the idea, what is overwhelming is this idea of the ayin liyesh, very similar, beyond replication. It's the koyach of ayin liyesh ex nihilo, tamid, constantly, midishon b'shon, every single year, which is me'ein b'chinas ein sof. It's similar to the expression of infinite she'im yiskayim elam hazeh ribur avavos shanim. Theoretically, if this world would exist myriads, tens of thousands of years, as an example. Now, this world was only created for 6,000 years, as we know. We're holding towards the end. But he says, theoretically, hypothetically, if this world would be around for a ribud of Avis Shanim, tens and tens of years, tens of thousands of years, that's Mechmid Shan B'Shan. There's no stop. Every year it would continue to sprout. Which is the koyach, the enormous koyach of the offer. For the reasons the Alter Rebbe explained. As Hashem, the Alter Rebbe is going to go on and say, there's those, nonetheless, could you compare that forest, which trees are kind of growing incoherently, if you will, to when somebody, in a very organized way, cultivates the earth, puts the seed in a proper manner, the production is distinct, very distinct. And also the particular seed that they plant, organized setup. I want the apple tree, the orange tree, setup of an orchard, and then even the grain, fields of grain, the investment, cultivating the earth and investing with the seed, which is also, there's the similarity that you see the koyach of the offer, but in a total different way. Is what Alter Rebbe is going to explain by Hashem in its coming class. And with this, as we see, we're getting towards the end of the Geras. The Rebbe points out the virtue of mitzvah. As we know, the world of the Yid is comprised of davening, is learning Torah, but then doing the mitzvah, which, of course, the essentiality of davening and learning is part of Ashleisha Dvarim HaYomayim. For that matter, the union with HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the Torah is way beyond even the union with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. By doing a mitzvah, that Alter Rebbe explains there in these famously 3 chapters in Kuti Amorim, Perik Hey, Chav Gimel, Lamed Zayin. But yet in this chapter, the Alter Rebbe speaks about the great virtue of Dafka Lekim Mitzvahs Maisius, living in El Hazeh, doing mitzvahs, which the significant majority of the mitzvahs, it deals with the fabric, if you will, of El Hazeh. Tzitzis, tefillins, the height of the animal, and so on. Trumas Maisus from the offer, actually. Because Dafka in the lowly, in the as we see it evidently. And its counterpart in Elam Haza, the offer carries that Ein Sof. The mitzvah, which is connected to the physicality of Elam Haza, is, which really connects a Yid to Atzmos, to the Etzem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the investment in a mitzvah, similar to planting, and in a very organized, structured manner, arousing the koich of the offer, which is similar to the investment via the mitzvah, precisely the way the Eibishter prescribes the mitzvah and the way it's meant to be done. The enormous koich. That's why Dr. concludes that little bird which is brought in the Beis HaMikdash may be built very soon. Or beyond that, a little bird flower, it makes a whole uproar, and the entire Seder Shtalshel is on high. Malachim can't wait till that little bird is sacrificed down here in this world. And by extension, you're doing a mitzvah. It's more communal. It's just all the entire heavenly army, which is the Malachim, are excited from what? The bird on the altar, in a particular place within Elam Haza. Yeah, because that's where the enormous koach, that's where the true infinite koach is in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, dafka in the mitzvahs, maisius. So the Rebbe is going to explain it, as should bring the message home. Maybe we'll have that grand siyum. I say grand siyum because the longest is most classes we gave out on one chapter. Maybe we'll be able to conclude this coming week. Just important to know, the Rebbe wrote this, we mentioned a few times, because HaKadosh was written a few hours, those will say a few hours, those will say maximum a few days before the Alter Rebbe left Elam Haza, passed on. And the Alter Rebbe, kind of his last koiches, if you will. Even the Alter Rebbe was very composed before he passed away. Very composed, even the hours and moments before he passed away. But kind of gave it the last, final presentation, how much we should appreciate living in Elam Haza for the reason that here is where you can do the mitzvah. Can't do it anywhere else. Can't put on tefillin in Gan Eden. There's Torah there, but the enormous koach comes from the koach of the mitzvah, the dafka in Elam Haza, in this very physical world. Nisab HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lislei Dira B'Tachteinim. This tachtim carries and is connected to Lo Yisbarach, the core essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which comes through a mitzvah, which is part of the tachtin, the elevation, the sublimation of the tachtin towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Synonymous with this idea, the koach of the offer, the lowest, carries the most demonstrably the koach of Ein Sof, and precisely the lowest, and the offer is